Chapter 23 of American History Stories, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. American History Stories, Volume 2, by Laura L. Pratt. Chapter 23. Words only to the song, The Star-Spangled Banner. Music may be found in the text. Oh, say can you see, by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars, through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched, were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does the star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? On the shore dimly seen through the mists of the deep, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence reposes, what is that which the breeze o'er the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected, now shines on the stream. 'Tis the star-spangled banner. Oh, long may it wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Oh, thus to be it ever, when free men shall stand between their loved home and foul war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace may the heaven's rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, when our cause is so just, and this be our motto: In God is our trust, and the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. End of chapter 23. Chapter 25 of American History Stories, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. American History Stories, Volume 2, by Laura L. Pratt. Chapter 25. A Petty Tyrant. In the early days of the Revolution, there was a British officer, General Prescott, stationed at Newport. Although his name was the same, he was a very different man from the one we heard of at Bunker Hill. He was a mean sort of a man, and seemed to think that frightening children and threatening women were quite brave things to do. He demanded that every man who met him should take off his hat to him as he passed. As the people of Newport were entirely at his mercy, many of them obeyed him. One day a good old Quaker came along. "Take off that hat!" shouted Prescott. "I take off my hat to no man," said the Quaker. "Knock off that old fool's hat," said Prescott to one of his companions, and threatening and swearing, Prescott passed on, resolved to get his revenge in some way on the Quaker. He could think of nothing that would grieve the old man more than to take away from him a pair of horses of which he was very fond. Beautiful black horses they were, as gentle and loving with the old Quaker as kittens. The very next morning Prescott sent a detachment of soldiers to take these horses. Of course there was nothing to do but to give them up. Whatever the cruel general did with them was never known. But that afternoon the good old Quaker found one lying by the roadside dying. the old man knelt down beside him, took his head into his lap, sobbing like a child over his four-footed friend. The poor horse tried to lift his head to look into his old master's face, and with one great shudder dropped back dead. At another time, this Prescott wanted a sidewalk in front of his house, and so instead of going to work to collect the stones honestly and build his sidewalk, he ordered his men to take up the doorsteps of the houses in the neighborhood and build one for him. The people of Newport declared they would endure him no longer, and so one night Colonel Barton, one of the patriots of Newport, planned to surprise the general and take him prisoner. Prescott was then staying at the house of a Quaker a little outside of the town. Quietly they crept up to the house and entered. "Where is Prescott's room?" said Barton to the Quaker. The Quaker pointed directly overhead, and up the stairs they dashed, a little negro boy, Jack, who hated the general well, leading the way. Bang went the tough little woolly head of Jack against the door of the chamber, and open it flew. Prescott sprang up in bed as they entered, and there was no chance for escape. His aide in another room, hearing the noise, jumped out of the window to give the alarm, but was instantly captured by the men below. Barton ordered the general to rise and go with them. He begged for time to dress, but delay was dangerous. Throwing a cloak about him, they took him in his shirt, telling him that on the other side of the bay he would have time to dress at his leisure. The rest of the party who had remained on guard outside formed around the prisoners, and as stealthily as they came they made their way back to the boats. Once again with muffled oars they passed by the frigates, the men chuckling to themselves as they heard the sentries cry of "All's well," and thinking how angry they would be when, a little later, they learned that all was ill. He was carried to Washington's camp and made a prisoner. It is said that while on the way to Washington he was so rude to the wife of a Connecticut innkeeper that her husband gave him a sound horsewhipping. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of American History Stories, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. American History Stories, Volume 2, by Laura L. Pratt. Chapter 26. The Leaden Statue. There had been so much resistance to the Stamp Act before the Revolution that England repealed it not long after. The colonists were overjoyed at the news, because they thought it meant that the English king had decided to deal fairly with the colonists in the future. The Sons of Liberty in New York City, in an excess of joy, cast a leaden statue of the king and set it up in the Bowling Green. Hardly was it in place when news came that the English government had passed another law, more unjust, if possible, than the Stamp Act, and that they were going to send troops over to take possession of the harbors of the principal cities. And when, in the following spring, troops stationed themselves on Staten Island, the fury of these Sons of Liberty knew no bounds. Then, when at last came the Declaration of Independence, read to them by Washington himself, they thronged through the streets, shouting, "Liberty! Liberty!" "Down with the statue of England's king!" cried one, and in an instant the air rang with the cries of "Down with the statue! Down with the king!" Rushing to the green, they tore it down, and whooping and dancing like wild Indians, they hacked it in pieces. "Give us the lead," cried a daughter of Liberty, "and we women will make it into bullets to shoot these British tyrants." "Yes, yes," cried the mob, "give the lead to the Daughters of Liberty." And so the Daughters of Liberty, without so much noise perhaps, but with just as much patriotism, went to work making the lead up into bullets. It is said that the names of the women who made the largest number were placed on record. Report says that Mrs. Marvin made 6,058, Laura Marvin 8,370, Mary Marvin 10,790, and Ruth Marvin 11,592. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of American History Stories, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. American History Stories, Volume 2, by Laura L. Pratt. Chapter 27, Free and Equal. When the affair known as the Boston Tea Party occurred, Cynthia Smith was 5 years old. Her home was in Charleston, and she helped in many ways when her father sent all his rice to the North, as he was obliged to, because England had shut up our harbor by what is known as the Boston Port Bill. 2 years later she saw, with aching heart, 4 of her brothers go to war, and eager to help the cause, she learned in time to spin, to weave, and to knit for the brave soldiers. The only pleasure she had was with a pretty red and white calf that her father had given her, and when the Declaration of Independence was signed, she named her pet Free and Equal. Through all the dreary days and months which followed, Cynthia grew more and more fond of her friend. Still, she longed to go herself and fight for her country. Finally, her father and one remaining brother left home to join General Gates's army. During this time, great damage was done to the Southern homes by the British soldiers. Cynthia was ready to protect her home and mother, come what might. But one day, on returning home from an errand, she was dismayed to find that the British soldiers had carried off Free and Equal. It did not take long, however, for Cynthia to decide what she would do. Off she started at once for the headquarters of Lord Cornwallis. Hurrying over 3 miles of hot, dusty road, she gained entrance to the great general's room. A feast was being held just then, but once in his presence it would not do to give up. So, summoning all her courage, she told him that his soldiers had stolen her cow, and that she had come to take her back again. Lord Cornwallis was much attracted towards the sturdy little rebel, as he called her, and promised to have Free and Equal returned to her at once. Before the little girl went back home with her pet, the general patted her on the head, told her she was a brave little woman, and gave her a pair of silver knee buckles. These buckles are still in the hands of the descendants of Cynthia Smith, and they are, and justly too, very proud of them and of their grandmother, once the little Cynthia. End of chapter 27.